Hi, movie monkeys. Guess what I saw recently? Avatar, The Way of Water. I call it Avatar 2 because Way of Water is a little pretentious, but nobody calls them 2 anymore, do they? All right, I'm taking these off. So, I'm Ryan Ellis. This is Bev Ellis, my wife. Where have you ever seen our, 7th video? Well, there's more than that because I've done some of my own. But I think it's our 7th. Well, then again, no. Those are just the podcasts online with our slate the whole time, our graphic logo. We do videos together so far. So we'll be talking about 2 movies. You know one of them already. We'll be talking about this week's movie, There's Something About Mary. Before any of that, of course, we're going to do a listener email, and we're going to talk about Black History Month and make 2 recommendations, one each, because, of course, it is February, and that's Black History Month. So There's Something About Mary, the first thing to talk about. There are no corrections this week. No, well, actuallys. I think we got it right for once. But I did have some additional thoughts. First, how did an orthopedic surgeon ever fall for Healy's lies? We talked about this a little bit. I know he tries to find out what she likes and then just pretends to like that stuff too, but how gullible is she? She says, oh, what's his name, when she wants to ditch him, to Magda, when she makes the date with Ted instead. And she never really seems to truly want to be around him, and yet she goes on a date with him. I don't really get that. They make it seem like she's obviously quite smart, and yet she falls for these stupid lies. That hilarious scene where he calls people with disabilities names. Any thoughts on that?
Maybe she's scamming all of them. She's not actually an orthopedic surgeon. She's the one who's pulling one over on everybody. Because for an orthopedic surgeon, she's sure never...
Busy?
Yeah. As I said in the podcast, she's the world's least busy orthopedic surgeon.
And how do we not talk about how funny it is at the end of the movie when Ted has called Brett Favre to be with Mary. He seems at peace. He walks out. And then Ugly cries.
One of my favorite gags in the movie.
And we didn't mention it in the podcast.
When I saw it in the theater, I was just like, that's it. This movie went from a like to a love. You don't see it coming, like a lot of jokes in that movie. Part of what makes it so magical. They're so imaginative with their jokes. It's so good. A hard agree.
Such a great laugh. All right, then the reviews. All Quiet on the Western Front. We've seen that, and of course, Avatar, The Way of Water in the past week. All Quiet on the Western Front is a movie about how, I think at least, Felix Kemmerer is made very uncomfortable. He's often covered in filth and blood and such. This guy goes through some serious hell. I even brought up The Revenant. Leo goes through hell and won an Oscar for that.
Very apt comparison.
Not the only reason he won the Oscar for that movie, but it's a reason why Leo finally won. This guy goes through something else.
He's dirty from like the 30-minute mark till the very end. And when I say dirty, I mean filthy. I mean like mud caked on his eyes. His hands are never clean. That poor guy.
The film is a remarkable achievement by Edward Berger and his team. That's the director. He was nominated for his screenplay, by the way. He was, but not for directing. I admire the Academy for nominating this for Best Picture because it wasn't an obvious choice.
No.
And it got a ton of nominations. I think it's 8 or 9, something like that.
Foreign language and a streamer and a movie that probably most Americans, Canadians like us, were barely aware of.
Until
if they saw it at all.
Had to see it for Oscars. So
yeah.
We're talking about it on March 6th for our Oscars preview show.
Yeah.
Motorcycle Goes By. It deserves the technical nominations, I would say. And it might even deserve to win a few of them. We like the music an awful lot. But you weren't a fan of the film in general.
No, I didn't like it. I guess just the short version of this, and lots of people disagree with me, and that's cool. I found it just too relentless, kind of like The Revenant. But even The Revenant gave you breathers from time to time. The way that the movie just nonstop ramps up, not just the violence, but the horror. It felt by the end like torture porn, and it's a long movie. It is a long time to just be bombarded with one awful thing, one worse thing after another happening. There's a few moments that I won't get into because I certainly don't want to spoil it for anybody, where I really thought it was over the top and unnecessary, diminishing returns. Yeah. You liked it better than I did, though.
Like's a weird word for a movie like this, but it's outstandingly well made. And it's pretty powerful stuff. And it is very similar to the original movie, although apparently they based it more so on the book than on the movie that was made in 1930. One of our first, I think we looked it up, 8 podcasts we ever did, because we were doing the AFI movies chronologically.
Yeah, that's right. Would you say it bears any comparison to Passion of the Christ? And I just say that because that's another movie that one could describe as torture porn. Which is what I described All Quiet on the Western Front as. Calling
Passion of the Christ something I loved is the wrong word for it, but it's a very powerful film, and I admired Mel's ability as a director to put that thing across the way he did. I'm going to cover a Mel Gibson movie in March.
Love or hate a movie, if it makes you feel something, then there's value there. I'll always say, even a movie that I absolutely hate, If it made me feel something, then it can't be garbage. And that's why when people say they like All Quiet on the Western Front, I'm like, cool, I'm glad somebody enjoyed it, but not this girl.
I can take it more than some people, I guess. So that brings us to Avatar, The Way of Water.
Which I refuse to see.
Oh, so trippy. Yeah, I saw it alone during the day. Yesterday, in fact. We're recording this on the Wednesday before we post it, and I saw it on Tuesday, so it was a little cheaper as well. And I made sure to see the high frame rate, the 3D, obviously, the Ultra AVX, pretty big screen. And I think I might have liked it more than the first movie. If they mentioned unobtainium, I was in the washroom, which I was twice, because it's long. But I didn't hear that at all. There's a new element that they're using in this movie. It isn't a huge part of the storyline, unless there's more to it that I missed when I was in the washroom. I'm never going to be a Sam Worthington fan, but this is not really a spoiler if you saw the first movie. He's always not even Avatar now, he's just one of the Na'vi, so he's better that way. The movie's more about the kids in this case. Everyone's pretty good in the film, I thought. It has to win visual effects, because the whole movie almost is a visual effect. There's rarely any time when there's not visual effects of some kind on screen. They're state-of-the-art. And Jim Cameron's movie is almost always, or at least nominated for that. It was again this year. All Quiet is also nominated for the visual effects Oscar, and would be...
should not be.
Oh, I don't know. I think there's a lot of visual effects in that you can't see.
Okay. Agreed.
That you don't notice.
But there's also just some very basic, easy visual effects that look terrible. Like some blood splatter that looked just so obviously like it was done after the fact. But it has some pretty stiff competition anyway.
But as for Avatar, The Way of Water, it's going to win that, or at least it should win that award for sure. It is up for Best Picture, which I don't really agree with, but I think I like this movie better than the first one, which I think, we don't know for sure, probably finished second behind The Hurt Locker. This will probably finish 7th or 8th or something like that. And really what it's there for in that category is a thank you, as is Top Gun Maverick, which is a better movie for being so big, and you could say bringing people back to the movies this year. It also leaves a lot of things up in the air, which is pretty typical for not even a middle movie. Apparently they're making a lot more than just 3 of them.
3.5 hours long, too.
Well, 3:10 or so.
Okay.
And as soon as it said, directed by James Cameron, I was out of there, because I had to pee again.
If it was under 2 hours, I would see it just to satisfy my curiosity, to see what the high frame rate looks like, and to just, see the marvel of it, because I 1000% agree with you that when it comes to special effects, he's incredible, and he'll win that award, and he'll deserve it. He really creates things from scratch. He's so on the vanguard, pushing the envelope. So much respect. That's exactly who the award ought to go to.
He won't win, though, if they win for visual effects. He's not one of the people on the team, technically.
Fair
he probably
enough.
should be.
Yeah, it's true. He is more the foreman of that team. He's not the one actually doing it.
He's up for producing the movie, so he is going to be at the show as a producer. Or at least he should be, could be, whatever. So an email, then, we got this week, or a YouTube comment, I guess it was. Email? No, it was an email, I guess. Lucian listened to our 28 Days Later podcast recently, and he compared the opening to a movie called The Day of the Triffids. Maybe that's a novel as well, but I think it's a movie.
It is, yeah.
He also thinks the theme of the movie is it's about what it is to be British. I guess he's implying there's a simmering rage under the surface of Brits, and when things go bad, the veneer of civility is gone, which you could argue is something that might be true about us Canadians as well. We're so polite, but if things really went bad, would we continue to be? Of course we wouldn't be.
I would love to hear him elaborate on that theory. That's a take I'd never thought of. Well, of course I wouldn't. I'm not British, so I don't know
Lucian,
how to relate to that. But
I did shorten his email in what I just said now. He had more detail. I condensed it. And then the last thing we'll do is what we're going to do for the rest of February. Black History Month is in February, so some recommendations. My chair is agreeing with that. I'm going to start Four Little Girls, the Spike Lee documentary from 97, I think it was, the late 90s. I didn't write down what year it was. I've seen it a few times. It's been a long time since I have. It's a very powerful film. It's about the 1963 bombing of a black church by white pricks in Birmingham, Alabama. It's bad enough to hate someone or to want to hurt them just because you're white and they're not. But to hurt and kill kids...
You could say the kids weren't their target, but if you're going to bomb a church on a Sunday, you know that you're putting children in harm's way and innocent people...
If you're ever going to turn yourself in for something, that was the time to do it. And I don't think they did.
No, they're monsters. Events that are depicted, I think, in Selma quite beautifully.
Oh, probably, yeah.
There's this really moving scene where you see what happens.
Part of what galvanizes the movement, I think, is that exact thing.
As
and
it
Spike
should.
Lee does a great job. His second Oscar nomination at that point, because he'd been nominated for writing Do the Right Thing and then for making this documentary. And of course, he's since won for Black Klansman. But I recommend Four Little Girls. Bev's recommendation is...
I also picked a documentary, although about a very different subject. I picked Paris is Burning, which is a classic documentary, a really beautiful, incredibly empathetic film about the ballroom culture of all these queer, Black, and Latino and Latinas who lived in New York in the 80s. These were just some of the most adrift, rejected people in the world. A lot of them kicked out by their families, experiencing tons of trauma and very alone. And it's a movie about how they don't just make their own chosen family, but how they make their own culture. And the culture that they created in that time and place with these balls, nobody even knew when the documentary was made, although the documentary contributed to the influence it ultimately had, that it became incredibly influential. Vogue, Madonna, she admitted that the movie was her entryway into this culture. So she hired a bunch of the people she saw in the documentary to be her dancers and to create Vogue. I mean, they were already voguing.
They struck a pose.
Yeah, and speaking of Pose, the show Pose is a dramatization, like a scripted version of exactly what was happening back then. So much of what is really popular culture now started in this seed of these rejected people who created magic with their life force. It is such an affirming movie, even though it's really sad at times and it can break your heart. I think it's just a beautiful movie about the human spirit and about how the greatest art and the greatest love can come from even oppression.
And I have never seen it, so maybe
The very rare, and I am telling you, very rare, Bev has seen it and Ryan hasn't. It almost never happens. No, I just have to enjoy this. It's a special moment.
Filled with shame. Right
Filled with shame. He's going to watch it tonight when I go to bed.
So that's it. The recommendations are Four Little Girls and Paris is Burning, 2 documentaries about the Black experience. Black History Month continues. So that's it for the video. Last Friday I posted one about The Way We Were. Again, just the podcast with the graphic, the logo. That's all it is. The next one you and I will do is Dangerous Liaisons. Whoa, my phone's falling. But coming up right now is the There's Something About Mary podcast in its entirety, as you would have gotten it from Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. So if you've already heard it, you're going to hear it again. Nothing else will be added. Please subscribe, share this video, like it, do all those things. I forget to say that sometimes. And you won't miss anything we ever cover if you do that, because you'll be alerted.
And find our podcast, Have You Ever Seen? Wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Have you ever seen? You're going to see that logo now for about 50 minutes straight. So thanks for watching. Now let's find out what's up with Mary. Google Maps says that driving from Providence to Miami will take you about 21 hours today. So if you do like Ben Stiller does and There's Something About Mary and decide to make that trip, you better bring some coffee. That or plan to sleep by the side of the road. Although look how that worked out for Garrett Hedlund and Inside Llewyn Davis a few weeks ago. Anyway, back to coffee talk. Sparkplug Coffee has the freshest beans in Canada, which are fairly traded and premium Arabica goodness. If you happen to be a Canadian or an American, Rhode Islander, Floridian, whatever, you can get whatever you order from Sparkplug in a week or less. And you Canadians, just like us, will get it shipped absolutely, positively for free. And if you're a decaf fan or a half-calf zealot, you can get however much of that you want. Membership has its privileges, right? Well, that's true about Sparkplug too. You'll get perks and deals that the buyers who just order once in a while will not get. So if you're a regular consumer of the hot brown stuff, then you'll be happy to keep saving that money every time you order. Even poor Brett Favre can afford Sparkplug. And this is a guy who desperately needed a PPP loan a while back. So he'll be grinning ear to ear, don't touch the ears, don't touch Warren's ears, at how many bucks he's keeping in his bank account. You listeners, Brett Favre, Mary, whomever, can also customize your membership to get your product when it suits you. This isn't some coffee of the month scam that Pat Healy would convince you is the right thing to do, with those giant teeth. So use your computer or your phone or iPad or whatever device you click on to go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES for Have You Ever Seen. Our HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. Now, Andrew Luther, there might be something about you, but there's definitely something about that theme music, so please play it now.
And action! Have you ever seen?
There's Something About Mary. Hiya, movie lovers, and thanks to all you Niners fans, and non-Niners fans too, for checking out the 492nd edition of Have You Ever Seen? We've been reviewing movies from days of yore for just about 10 years, most of which was spent with us being called the Top 100 Project. We made the name change at the start of the year, and so far, so good. Oh, careful if you don't like to have movies spoiled for you, because we're going to cover the Farrelly Brothers Cum comedy from cover to cover. I'm the big baseball fan who doesn't like having his ears touched until the end of the movie, after I've learned to trust you. Ryan Ellis. And here's my wife, the lady who often changes in front of open windows and wears dresses that show off her nipples as plain as day. That goofy bastard. Bev.
That's me.
Matt Dillon's funniest movie ever, and certainly his funniest moment ever, has got to be, and it may be politically incorrect, but I don't care, this whole movie is really, and it's also 25 years old, but he loves those goofy bastards. I laughed for minutes after that happened, even though I knew it was coming. Okay, we're now a few weeks into the month of crazy, stupid love. February is, of course, the month of Valentine's Day, which happens to be tomorrow. So we're discussing films with romances that are improbable, impossible, or even a little bit insane. This is the one funny love story we'll be discussing in February, so let's start discussing. Well, the only funny one that you and I will cover anyway. The coming attractions trivia question for There's Something About Mary. Cameron Diaz and W. Earl Brown played brother and sister in There's Something About Mary, and then would go on to be in the same movie the next year, 1999. Which movie was that?
It was Being John Malkovich.
Malkovich.
She, of course, has a rather big part as a member of the love triangle. He, I think, is the first guy to pay to go into Malkovich.
BJM Inc. Yeah, he's the first one. He's pretty funny in that, especially with Maxine. So these two don't share any scenes in that movie. But yes, they are in a great comedy the very next year. Not as famous as this, probably. Well, maybe it is to movie buffs and not as successful. So he goes through the portal first when it comes to business. But she goes through it more than anyone else. So they are linked. Okay, There's Something About Mary was unleashed on the world by 20th Century Fox 25 years ago on July 15th, 1998. The film cost about $23 million to make and ended up grossing nearly $370 million. Psst, studio heads. Comedies can be profitable, really profitable. I know it's been 25 years, but good God, they can be. Okay, Babbitt, it's been 25 years, so please give us the skinny and tell us what There's Something About Mary is all about.
Ben Stiller is Ted, a 30-something nice guy who's still hung up on the one who got away, Mary Jensen. Ted hires a private investigator, Pat, to track Mary down, but Pat falls in love with her too, lies to Ted, and tricks Mary into going out with him. So, Ted and his friend Dom, who's also, by the way, obsessed with Mary, head down to run interference. But it's okay because Mary's friend Tucker, who is, naturally, also obsessed with her, spoils it for Pat first. Ted and Mary are hitting it off until she discovers he was the one who hired Pat in the first place and kicks him to the curb. That is, until she gets a real eyeful of the team of wacky suitors who are Ted's competition, then she decides to give him a shot after all.
She'll settle now. She can do better than all these guys. Start fresh in the morning.
Truly good.
And of course, it's a twist that Dom, Chris Elliott, turns out to be Woogie, the boyfriend turned stalker that Mary had to escape long ago. It wouldn't take much to make this into a thriller where we worry for Mary's life. All these loony guys obsessing over her. Although it is a great comedy. Now my favorite of the three Fairleys, the big three that they started their careers with. In fact, I think I like the third most because I love Kingpin. It's underrated. And of course, Dumb and Dumber, one of the greatest endings of all time, and it's funny throughout. But I do think this movie's got some big laughs, and I certainly cannot deny I LOL'd a lot.
This is my favorite of those three.
It probably is for most people, and I told you already how successful it really was. Those other two didn't do anything close to that kind of business, especially Kingpin. Or, in a nutshell, you have to remember that Ben Stiller plays a writer in this. It is overlooked sometimes, and of course Mary is an orthopedic surgeon. I'd forgotten that. I thought maybe she was a Meals on Wheels person, because you see her doing that with Warren's cohorts and whatnot.
Well, she is the world's least busy orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah. Not much business in Miami for that. Okay, the nutshell. So he's a writer. The pen is truly mightier than Brett Favre's sword. And we know all about Brett Favre's sword. We would in the years that followed this movie.
Oh, God. Oh, right, because he sent photos? Is that what you're talking about? Did he send someone dick pics? Is that what you're talking
Brett
about?
Favre.
Okay. The scandal I think of Brett Favre for is the PPP loans.
Which was just last year, yeah. Well, maybe it was a couple years ago, but it's in the last few years. No, he's a guy I loved. I didn't watch football that much, but when I did, I was a Packers fan because I just loved the way he played the game. And then as years go on, he's one of those people that you wish you knew less about.
But at the time this movie came out, I'm just quoting you, he was a real Boy Scout.
Yeah.
His image was very squeaky clean.
That's why it's fun casting, too. Apparently it was going to be Steve Young because she talks about being a Niners fan. Although then where do you go at the very end of the movie? Because her motivation is, I told you, Ted, I'm a Niners fan. Because why else do you ditch Brett Favre?
Well, you just write a different joke.
I guess that's the point, yeah. But then Steve Young, I think, is related to Brigham Young. And he's a Mormon, so he wouldn't be in this movie because of the subject matter. And Steve Young was the quarterback after Joe Montana for the Niners, two very famous people. You probably know Joe Montana's name, I bet, right?
I do recognize that name. Steve Young, not so much.
Didn't think you would. That's a pretty ordinary name.
It won't surprise anybody that the first time I saw this movie, I had no idea who Brett Favre was. That joke was totally wasted on me.
Would be on a lot of people, I think, because as famous as he was, not everybody cares about football. The Farrellys, though, in their first three movies, and maybe the other ones, I don't know the other movies as well as I know the first three, but they had big-name athletes in all of them. Cam Neely was in the very first one, or was that Roger Clemens? Yeah, I think it's Neely was in the first one. Roger Clemens was in Kingpin, so that was their thing to cast a big-name athlete. I'm sure they did it in other films, like Stuck on You and The Stooges. Okay, the Rotten Tomatoes critics on There's Something About Mary are great. 84% of them like the film. 7 out of 10 is the average. There are 85 reviews on the site. But surprisingly, only 61% of audiences. I would have thought the other way around. The critics would give it a fresh tomato, but barely, and the audiences would love it, but it's reversed.
That is so low.
I know. And it was also Gene Siskel's number 9 in 1998. He was a huge fan. They dedicated, I think it was Me, Myself, and Irene to him because he had died in the meantime, and he was such a big fan of this, but even more so Kingpin, which, as I said before, not that many people really liked, but I did. First time I saw it, and certainly when Chris and I covered it years ago for Scoring at the Movies. It was one of our first maybe 10 episodes. So the film was third at the 1998 U.S. box office. Saving Private Ryan, we've covered that, was number 1. The Truman Show was number 12. We covered that. Of course, Carrie worked with them on Dumb and Dumber. And then also Me, Myself, and Irene. And Out of Sight was 57th. And we covered that just last month, I guess now. Feels like months and months ago. It's only been about 6 weeks of this year. There are plenty of films from the 80s on the Top 100 Laughs list, but only 5 from the 90s. And this is the highest ranked one of those. This was 27th. Groundhog Day was 34th, Mrs. Doubtfire was 67th, City Slickers was 91st, and Fargo was 93rd.
City Slickers went over Fargo.
I'm not sure I would necessarily truly invert that group of 5, but I might, because Fargo for me should certainly be in the top 30, and I don't think this should be.
I guess that means that The Big Lebowski was left out.
I told you it was never even nominated for that list.
That is so crazy.
Only for the mystery category of the top 100 genres.
Come on.
And that Laughs list came out in 2000, so no movies could have made it for the past 22 plus years. Mary was also nominated for the top 100 passions. That actually fits, considering what's going on here. The top 100 genres, the rom-com category. I wouldn't have put it on that one. And the 2007 AFI Top 100 list. It had a shot at making the greatest movies of all time.
Wow.
But it wasn't eligible the first time because they stopped the nominees in 1996. And Fargo, of course, made that first AFI list and the comedies list, of course, too. All right, then. I don't think you've seen this movie in a long time. We have the DVD, but watch the movie on Disney+. What'd you think of it?
This movie proves you really can joke about absolutely anything you want, as long as you're actually funny.
I've said it many times.
And this movie is so funny. For all the controversial material, they never make the underdogs the butt of the joke, or if they do, it's someone like Magda, who could never care less. It just bombards you with all their silly ideas, packed into a story that's truly easy to get caught up in. Like, you do care. It's a romance that you root for, likable characters, and this bizarre but perfect formula. I loved it. I was afraid I would hate it because comedies so often age poorly, but we were really laughing.
Well, and of course, this kind of subject matter would certainly bother plenty of people now who can't possibly ever take a joke about anything. But you just said it a minute ago, and I think I'm stealing from Chris Rock when I've said many times, you can make anything funny. You could throw an old man down a flight of stairs. You're just not supposed to do it. Do that and make it funny is what I'm getting at there.
Well, you and Chris recently covered Naked Gun, where people are thrown downstairs.
Same
where
thing.
Somebody in a wheelchair is pushed downstairs.
It is OJ.
Flips over. It is OJ, so maybe that adds to the funny. But there is a way to make it funny when you're being this silly and the audience is just in on the joke with you. They're constantly punching down, or the people they're punishing are people who get theirs in the end. Ted takes more abuse.
Punching up, you mean, not punching down.
Punching up. That's what I meant. Ted takes so much abuse in this movie. The way it escalates is part of the comedy. But he gets the girl in the end. Mm-hmm. And part of the charm and the sweetness of the film is the way he always picks himself back up and carries on. It's almost cartoonish.
For sure. Well, then again, you mentioned Naked Gun also is cartoonish. And I can compare the two movies in one big way. And that is the absurdity of some of the jokes when it comes to what turns out to be violence. In The Naked Gun, there's a scene towards the end where Priscilla Presley's being pulled up the stairs at the baseball park. And at first, it's Ricardo Montalban doing that with her. But then it's clearly a dummy. He's whipping her all over the place. And isn't there an animal in that movie that's abused? I forget now. No, I brought up the point in Anchorman when Jack Black kicks Will Ferrell's dog over the bridge. It's so obviously a stuffed animal. Well, same with this. The dog takes abuse. That would certainly bother you if it was remotely close to real. But it's so obviously a stuffed animal when Matt Dillon's trying to revive it after he's the one that knocked it out. It's not a stuffed animal when Ben Stiller is having to fight it off. That actually is one of those I could see why that would bother people a little bit more. But when it dives out the window trying to attack Ben Stiller, that was in the trailer. I think it might have been the last shot of the trailer. I didn't look that closely, but that was obviously a fake dog. And we know it wasn't a dog. I just mean that scene was sold a little bit more, that it was the dog the whole time. And the Matt Dillon scene, almost none of that was the dog until he revives it with the water, and then you almost see the jump cut of it. Oh, I'm up and I'm fine, which would be illogical too.
They want us to know it's a dummy. They're not remotely trying to hide that it's a fake dog because they're like, it's the concept you're laughing at. We would never dream of actually hurting a dog. This is what I mean when I say the audience is in on the joke.
But the actors have to sell it too. So Matt Dillon sells that he's actually holding a real dog and trying to revive it. Thinks it might be dead.
Zap it with
Don't go towards the light. But he lights it on fire. And then Ben Stiller's fighting off what should be this ferocious pit bull or Rottweiler instead of this little guy who's just hepped up and dragging him across the floor. His fingernails are scratching the floor. That's on Ben Stiller. But you just said about Ben Stiller taking so much abuse. I don't know why I didn't love this movie the first time. Liked it just fine. The friend I saw it with was truly grossed out. Magda's fake boobs. He was really grossed out by that, surprisingly. I don't know why that was such a big deal to him. The cum gag I didn't love either, but I can't deny the timing especially on it is hilarious. Watching the whole movie again, it's so clearly obvious that the thing is not on his ear until he gets to the door. They shoot it well enough for a few minutes or a few seconds that you can't see. I think it's the left side of his head, so the left ear with the cum hanging off of it. But when they have a shot above him, you know he doesn't have anything on his ear. But then the notion that she just goes ahead and puts it in her hair, that made people laugh in the theater, and I could hear the guy beside me go, ugh. But it's all about the payoff and the timing of it. When they go to the restaurant, he's talking for a second, so only a few seconds have passed and she's put this in her hair, and then of course it's standing straight up. That's pretty stupid. How does she not realize that that's not hair gel? It makes her hair stand up that straight, and it wouldn't even feel like hair gel. But it's probably the most classic, famous thing from this entire film.
Cameron Diaz was not a movie star when this came out. She had been in The Mask already.
Well, she was getting to be a movie star.
She was definitely an up-and-comer. They knew when they were writing this gag and shooting the gag that they were like, are you sure you're okay with this?
Jodie Foster wouldn't do this.
But she was legitimately like, this could actually derail my career. Could always see me as a gross-out comedy girl. So she was a little worried about it. So they promised her, listen, we'll shoot it. We'll put it in a test screening. If the reaction is not what we want, we'll cut it out. We're not going to do this to you. But the first test screening came, and it got the biggest laugh in the whole movie. She was there, and she was like, well, you have to leave it in. I'm not sure how she felt about the fact that they put the shot of her with her hair like that in the poster. And it became the defining image of the film, as her with her hair straight up with cum. I don't know why, but that joke was spoiled for me. Oh, yeah? So I never found it as funny. Kind of like you, I was like, that's the joke that got everybody, all of you?
It wasn't spoiled for me, though. I just didn't think it was as hilarious as everyone else.
I can't remember. I guess it couldn't have possibly been in the trailer because it's so vulgar, but somebody must have spoiled the joke for me. And it never felt that funny to me. Of course, it's ridiculous that he doesn't feel this thing on his ear. And Ben Stiller was like, we have to write something into the script about how I have no feeling in this ear because I have nerve damage or something. The audience is never going to buy this. And then the Farrelly brothers are like, they'll buy it. Relax.
And they did.
Because it's a comedy. The same way we buy it that a dog can jump out a window and survive in a full body cast. All the silly things that happen.
There's a good payoff, though, because it dives out the window. Ben Stiller has that look on his face when he pops up from behind the couch. And I think it's the very next shot, the dog's in the full body cast.
Yeah, a great visual gag. And you know the dog's actually in that body cast because you see him licking these little tongue popping out. For the rest of the shot, it's obviously a dummy dog in the cast, but still a great gag. By the way, something that was totally the real dog doing it, not that it could be anything else, but was a surprise to everybody when they were shooting it, was this part where Magda is reading her lines. The dog starts licking her right on the mouth and getting the tongue right in there. Now, you and I have had a few dogs that like to get right up in there as much as you'll let them. The story is that she was doing her lines and she's holding the dog up as she's supposed to, and he started licking her face and she just decided to go with it and play it perfectly straight. Meanwhile, the dog's tongue is up in her mouth and she just continued reading her lines like the total pro that she is. Testament to what a great comic actress she was. And she said the entire crew and cast who were there were absolutely losing their minds, trying not to ruin the take with laughter because nobody saw it coming. And then they yelled cut and they were like, that's magic. Check the gate. That is 100% making the cut.
We're moving on. And of course, Lynn Shay was in Kingpin. She's Woody Harrelson's disgusting landlord.
Yeah. She's in all their films, isn't she? She's been in like 6 of them or something.
And of course, she was the teacher in A Nightmare on Elm Street, which we covered a long time ago, because her brother, Bob Shea, owned New Line through all this time frame. So that's why she got acting gigs. I don't think she would have been an actress otherwise. And then she hit stardom, if you want to call it that, in the Insidious films, because she became the star of them. Yes, it started out being Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne, but as they went on, all those sequels, it became about her character.
Oh, how about that? I've never actually seen this.
And she was past retirement age when all that happened for her with the Insidious movies.
By the way, she has those leathery boobs framed in a shadow box in her house.
Yeah. Both Magda and Mary like to stand in front of the window with either nothing on or very little on. Mary is seen in a window 3 times in this movie. Arguably the most famous thing, actually, from this, it's probably the hair gel gag, okay, fine, but the Franks and Beans thing. Ted gets the date with the dream girl after he was nice to Warren the day before, I guess, or probably a week before, whatever, defending him. And Mary is the one who asks him out. I like that touch, too. She asks him to the prom. It's not like all this happens and she's grateful to him for helping out Warren and then he asks her out. No, she's the one that asks him out. Keith David and Marky Post are a fun team. We don't see them much. We never see them again with Mary and Warren after the early scenes when they're supposed to be young. Keith David especially is pretty fun. But okay, so Stiller in this weirdly designed house, somehow across the way in this weirdly L-shaped or U-shaped mansion they have, I guess. He's just innocently peeing, "Why do birds?" Yeah. He's so happy to be going on a date with this girl to the prom. And she's changing because of what had happened with Warren when he freaked out about the ears being touched. Which, by the way, right before the scene where the bullies are messing with him in the beginning of the film, somebody gets near his ears. I think one of the bullies does. And he doesn't react, so it's not consistent. But when anybody else does it, Ben Stiller, of course, gets attacked. And when he tries to put the baseball behind his ear and do that, "Ooh, what's behind your ear" trick? And that's why Mary has to change her dress or fix her dress because it got torn in that melee. And also, by the way, did you notice that Brett Favre is also attacked when he tries to touch the ears, even though Warren and he do get along? Norm Tucker had lied about that, and that's how Brett wasn't in Mary's life anymore, because if you're not going to be cool with Warren, Brett, then bye-bye. But it's a nice touch, and I mentioned it in the coffee sponsor. When Ted goes to leave at the end after he's done the right thing and brought Brett back to her life and said, "Hey, I'd rather you be happy with him than nobody," he pulls Warren's headphones off of his ear. "See you, Warren," and Warren doesn't react badly because he now trusts and likes Ted.
I didn't think that was a subtle touch. I thought that was pretty...
Sometimes I'm dumb.
That's the moment, because I think the next thing you see is her face reacting to this moment and her realizing, I guess it's kind of like if your dog likes somebody, well, they say this about Puffy, about the dog, well, he's a great judge of character, but Warren truly is Mary's judge of character. He's the canary, tells her when to trust somebody or not. And that's the moment when she decides she has to pick Ted over Brett, because if Warren likes Ted better... I mean, that's the reason that she ever asked Ted out in the first place, because he was nice to Warren, and that's the key to her heart, this person that she loves. They really were playing with fire, having a character like Warren, because it's just so easy. Well, maybe not so much in the 90s. It would have certainly offended people of the 90s, but I don't think now. It's like a more powerful voice now than it was back then. I don't know. I'm not part of the community, but I struggle to find offense in the way that they portray Warren and the way that they portray the other developmentally disabled
who
people
actually
in the cast,
are, but he's not.
Yeah, I'm sure if they made the movie now, they would have actually cast somebody who was developmentally disabled to play that part, but they cast an actor because that's what literally everybody did in the 90s. One of the people who was cast was their friend's brother or something, and that's part of why they wanted to make it a component in the plot, because they were like, well, we grew up around people with different kinds of, quote, disabilities. They liked incorporating people in their movies that were physically disabled, mentally disabled, and they're not made fun of. The butt of the joke is everybody who doesn't know how to behave around them because they overreact, or the whole thing with Pat. I can't say it, obviously, but the way he uses the R word so ignorantly.
Not as funny as Goofy Bastards, but close.
Just the way it rolls off his tongue obliviously is in itself funny. Even back in 98.
Because he sold 98, because he sold it so well. I think that's what it comes down to, is that this guy isn't sincere. We know that. But he is sincere about wanting to impress Mary. Maybe that's why it works.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
also,
that's right. That's the dynamic.
Dylan wasn't known for comedy, and so maybe that's part of it too. You got this generally serious actor that says things like that, and then the Goofy Bastards line, which still cracks me up. Just thinking about it cracks me up. But one of the biggest problems in the entire movie, and I like him in a lot of things, including the brilliant Tropic Thunder, which also has some offensive elements, but it's a very funny film, and that is Ben Stiller. Now, Dylan, I think, is great in the whole film, but he's sidelined in the second half, and most of his scenes in probably the last hour are generally with Lee Evans, who's pretty funny, too. I tried to figure out why I didn't love this movie when I saw it the second time, or even the first, but especially the second time. Maybe it's Ben Stiller. I don't know if I really buy his journey. I don't really want him to succeed in this movie. I don't think it's fair to call him a creepy stalker. Asking somebody to go pay the guy, to go find somebody he used to be interested in, just to find her. It wasn't like he was trying to do some of the things that Woogie was doing. It wasn't like he was doing the things that Norm/Tucker was doing, or that Healy does.
I think he tried normal ways to get in touch with her first, but she was intentionally off the grid because of Woogie, so she had to disappear. She literally changes her name, doesn't she? So,
she's Mary Jensen, I believe.
Yeah,
I forget what she says in the later scenes.
Yeah. His intentions are good. It's funny, they keep making the joke, oh, it's a stalker case about going to find his old flame. And he's arguing, no, it's not a stalker case. As the movie goes along, he never behaves like a stalker. He respects her boundaries. When she kicks him to the curb, he's like, you're right. And the next thing he does is digs up Brett Favre and reunites them because he discovers the whole premise was a lie, why they broke up. He does the right thing, and that's why, of course, he's not a stalker. Everybody else in this movie is a complete stalker who crosses the line every chance they get and behaves completely inappropriately and crazy. The whole joke is this woman is so perfect. I was thinking about Gone Girl. I think it's fair to say that everybody will know what I'm talking about when I talk about the cool girl. Mary is what would happen if there was ever a woman who actually fit all the ideals of the cool girl, in that she's hot, she's thin, but she loves to watch sports and eat hot dogs and drink beer and play sports. She's into everything that guys are into, but she looks like a model. I mean, she literally was a model before she started acting. She's the most impossibly perfect woman, so perfect, in fact, that she drives men insane on sight of her. That's the title of the movie. There's something about Mary. There is something about her that takes a normal man and makes him insane.
Do you think that, I said I didn't love Ben Stiller, but do you think that she's worthy of that? I've never been the hugest Cameron Diaz fan either.
You don't think she's hot enough to pull it off?
It's not just hot enough. They write her to be this perfect person. You're right about that. I don't really feel drawn to Cameron Diaz. I think she's great in being John Malkovich, maybe because it was such a different role for her. And I think she does a terrific job playing off of actors who'd been doing real movies more than she had for a long time. Not that The Mask and this aren't real, but you know what I'm saying. More challenging material. Cusack and Keener had done things that she had never done before, and I think she's pretty good in that. But I don't love the movies that came around that same time that got her nominations at the Globes and stuff. I don't love her performance, I mean. I don't think she's that great in Vanilla Sky. She's all right, I guess. Gangs of New York and so on. I've just never been the hugest Cameron Diaz fan.
Her acting or just her presence
I don't know what
in
it
general.
is.
Yeah, she's never really turned
But she's
on.
so ingratiating. I love her giggle laugh that she has.
Yeah. I think part of why she works in this part is because there's something about her, despite her epic hotness, she has a bit of a goofiness about her. There's a real accessibility.
The real person
about
does,
her.
not just the character.
Oh, yeah, that's the way she is. She always would be really disarming in interviews and award shows and stuff. She could always just really behave very much like a, quote, real person.
Seems like a nice person.
Somebody who's nice and somebody who just doesn't really take this whole persona very seriously. Even though she's objectively a beautiful woman and she would be cast in these parts of beautiful women, I don't really remember her being anybody's crush. There's something about Cameron that just doesn't put you over the line over really crushing hard on her the way you do with other actresses who could be objectively not as good looking as her. And even though her personality has a delightful quality about it, she's not your type. You don't go for
the tall, thin blonde.
The tall, thin. And she could almost be like an icy blonde. She has that perfect Scandinavian face.
I do appreciate, though, the number of times that you can see basically right through her clothes.
For somebody who doesn't put out on a first, second, or third date, she sure dresses like somebody who does.
I don't know if she's ever done nudity. Maybe she hasn't something, but it's not a lot. But in this movie, you can see her nipples very clearly.
That orange dress that she's wearing on her date with Ted, you were like, why wear anything? The fabric on that dress is made of nothing. It's painted on her.
So I don't love the two leads, I guess, in this movie. I don't dislike them. I've seen the movie probably 4 times over the years, maybe more, and I laughed my head off. But do you agree with me that Matt Dillon and maybe Lee Evans are the best things in this film, then, especially when it comes to pure comedy?
100% Matt Dillon is the funniest thing about this movie. He is so good in it, and it's such a surprise. But I totally disagree about Ben Stiller, your problem with him as the lead. I'm not going to say I'm the world's biggest Ben Stiller fan, but I struggle to imagine anybody else playing Ted. This was a role that
Jim Carrey was apparently in line for it.
But I can't see it. He could have played Dom. He's over the top. He could have played any other part in this movie, but for Ted, you need a straight man. All this stuff happens to him, and he just has to keep his composure, and that's what's funny. And this is a niche that he ended up doing over and over again. I specifically think of the Meet the Parents movies, which are all about the most unlikely, off-the-wall, crazy stuff happening to him, and him having to keep his composure throughout. So this became the lane that he ended up in after Something About Mary, because there is something about the way that he can always pick himself back up and keep pursuing Mary, keep doing the right thing, never let it get him down. When I think of this movie and I think of what makes it special, I remember the Frank and Beans, what do they call
Franks
it?
and Beans.
Franks and Beans scene, where he's in the bathroom and he doesn't know what to do and he's just panicking. So many movies would have him pull the zipper up, scream, and maybe cut to the ambulance, and they wouldn't do what this movie does.
The stateroom scene? The homage to the Marx Brothers?
It is so wild, and it's so creative, and it just keeps amping the comedy up
and they
to
don't
a new level.
Show the Franks and Beans until they do.
Yeah. And apparently that was massive. That close-up was obviously a dummy, and it was 2 feet tall.
Well, it's not even a dummy, it's just the crotch.
No, right, it's just the crotch. They just have this mock-up that they did of the...
To get the
just
detail.
That one shot. But the way it starts with...
Well, I said Franks and Beans, didn't I? It's Frank and Beans.
Because there's only one Frank and there's 2 Beans. As they argue over
How'd you
and
get
over.
the Beans over the Franks? Or Frank.
When that cop walks up to the window, I'm dying. They just keep ramping it up. So when I think of the Farrelly brothers and their style and the thing that they do that nobody else does, nobody else can really pull this off. We keep bringing it up with Naked Gun and Airplane. It's that same Zucker brothers style of humor that is so silly. It's funny, Naked Gun, it's a pretty vulgar movie. There's lots of sex jokes that happen in it, but it just doesn't take it quite to the next level that Something About Mary takes it.
It's brothers in both cases. And even the Farrellys, who kept making comedies, they're not anymore. Peter's making these serious movies, including Green Book. People call it a comedy, but it's a dramedy at best. And he won the Oscar for it, Best Picture, the screenplay. He directed but wasn't nominated, as we talked about in that podcast. If he and his brother work together at all anymore, it's not as much as it was. And you look at the resume that they had after this film, and none of them really stand out as much. I haven't seen a lot of them a second time. I want to come back to something you mentioned, though, about the disabilities thing. One of their films has a guy who either doesn't have legs or can't use his legs, so he has to walk on his hands. And it's not at all a joke. This guy's really like that. They knew him. They put him in their movie as one of the friends. So he puts on these gloves when they're at a gas station. Why are you doing that? There's a lot of crap on the ground at a gas station. And it's this making fun of himself thing, but he's not being made fun of. You know what I'm saying? Partly because this human being actually has to deal with this problem. And they've done it plenty of times in their films where they have somebody who has a disability, something's wrong with them, and they're trying to raise people like that up, as far as I can see. The Farrellys could be accused, and probably have been accused, of crossing the line. I think they did The Ringer. And I only saw that movie once.
That was Farrelly Brothers? I haven't seen it.
Well, I'm going to look this up while I talk here. And if that is them... That's a movie I only saw one time. It's on Disney+. I've been tempted to watch it again. And Johnny... Knoxville. I don't know if I laughed that much at it, but I didn't hate it as much as I would have thought, considering all those factors.
Well, as I recall, the big joke is that all of those people...
Are better than him.
Are better athletes than him.
Yeah.
He has this notion that he's disabused of, that he'll be able to beat them all in athletics if he just pretends to be disabled. And learns that he doesn't even come close. He doesn't hold a candle.
They produced The Ringer. They didn't direct it. Barry Blaustein directed it.
So we haven't talked yet about probably their most controversial film, especially in 2023, people looking back. People really hate Shallow Hal. A movie that I've thought about a lot this week because I feel so unoffended by There's Something About Mary, despite all the offensive material. And I'm thinking back about Shallow Hal, a movie that ought to really bother me. I'm a fat lady, and okay.
They portray these women as being gigantic.
Okay, fine, but so what? I think the worst thing the movie does is that it correlates being overweight with being ugly.
Right.
And
you're not ugly.
Oh, thank you, dear.
Of course, I'm biased, but I don't think too many people walking down the street would see you and think, you're not going to be a model tomorrow, but you're also not ugly. They're going to say, that's a very nice face, at least.
Okay, so let's take away my personal...
And many men would be drawn to you regardless.
Why, thank you, dear. Okay, let's take away my personal investment in fat activism and body positivity, or however you want to word it. I think that movie's far from perfect. I think it deserves some criticism. I wonder if that would be a movie that they would change. Really, their heart is in the right place. And I feel like with Shallow Hal, they probably thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing a good thing. I bet that it really did some harm.
The thing I remember about that film, and I'm not so sure that she feels good about it, but Gwyneth Paltrow sells so well this stick figure that she's always been, that she's actually, I think, supposed to be 300 pounds in the film. But he's saying about how beautiful you are, you're wonderful, you're all these things, but especially focusing on how gorgeous she is. But the look in her eyes, the pain of, but I'm not, why is he saying these things about me? For a woman who never dealt with that in her entire life, Gwyneth Paltrow, to sell that shows that for all of her faults, she's a hell of an actress. And also, this isn't exactly a spoiler alert, a movie like that, you know in the end he's going to see the light. It may be a little bit on the nose, but the neighbor across the street is some supermodel, beautiful young woman. When the movie starts, before he starts seeing the women that he didn't think of as attractive as now being beautiful, and so often in the film, the ones that are actually beautiful on the outside are jerks, so he sees Magda, basically, if you will. But the neighbor across the hall from him looks the exact same. So it may be a little bit on the nose. It is on the nose. I guess Clooney may be a good example of this. From what we know of the guy, he seems like a good human being. He's got his heart in the right place. He's married to somebody who's far more, and he knows it, far more important to the world than he is. But he's still such a good-looking man. There are some people that are the total package and then some, and plenty of them in Hollywood, and plenty of them in regular life. These guys, you said it, their heart's in the right place. Green Book, for all of its faults, its heart's in the right place. People might hate Shallow Hal. I only saw it one time way back when. I know it's on Disney Plus. Maybe I'll watch it one of these days again. They're trying to give the underdog their own movie. But you got to make it funny. So how do you make it funny? Well, have Jack Black, and especially Jason Alexander, be the butt of the joke. Have Johnny Knoxville be the butt of the joke. Have Ben Stiller be the butt of the joke. And Matt Dillon especially,
and
in this movie.
Make sure that joke is funny.
Yes.
I think a lot of people mistake a joke that doesn't land with a joke that's offensive.
Right.
Because if it actually makes you laugh, and you said if the heart's in the right place, then it helps the situation, lightens up the situation.
But let's get back to the probably second most famous laugh in the whole movie, and that's the Franks. I keep saying Franks. The Frank and Beans scene. One Frank. This movie is too long to be nominated for its editing at the Oscars. But any good comedy and any good horror film, but especially any good comedy, has to be about the timing. We already talked about some of the other scenes like this. Well, you knew it was coming, so you were laughing before it even happened. But what is it? The fireman or the cop unzips, cut, we got a bleeder!
And did you know that when they're rolling the gurney into the ambulance and it falls?
That was not supposed to happen.
That wasn't supposed to happen. That was an accident, and they kept it in the film. It's kind of like that episode of The Simpsons when he ends up in the gorge.
My favorite episode, because it's the one that made me a fan. I'd heard about this show. I'd never seen The Simpsons, and I see that great double joke of he misses the first time, and then in the ambulance, he goes right back down again. Back to Dylan, though, because, of course, in a lot of ways, he drives this whole story by quitting his job in Providence as a PI and going down to Miami to, I guess you could say, stalk Mary. And none of that's sweet, but there's also an element of, you got to appreciate his tenacity, that he comes up with such lies and then tries to make them work. Although if you want to be with this woman badly enough and you're going to pretend to be an architect, which impresses her, and you're going to pretend to care about mentally disabled people, and you're going to care about all the things that she cares about.
Pretend to have a condo.
Pretend to be a golfer, which she clearly is not, and she loves the sports. If you're going to do all these things, then why wouldn't you work? Because he's not doing anything else other than trying to get with her. Learn these things better. Learn more about architecture so Tucker doesn't embarrass you. Tucker/Norm.
What is the end goal here? She's eventually going to discover that you're full of shit.
You know nothing about Nepal.
He's never been to Santiago.
Twice last year. Who goes to Chile twice in 1 year, man? Or Santiago.
And let me tell you, when Lee Evans breaks character and becomes the pizza man, the first time I saw this movie, it blew my mind. I did not see that coming at all. Great guy.
Apparently people said he had a terrible English accent, which is ironic because the guy actually is English.
Yeah, but he was doing a fake English accent.
I don't think it sounds that bad anyway.
Maybe because we're not English. It was English people who were like, that's the worst fake English accent I've ever heard.
Hey.
But he was doing an impersonation of an American doing a terrible English accent. Now, granted, his American accent also not that great. He definitely sounds pretty silly.
I love her, man.
Yeah. He doesn't even have a back injury anymore.
But he did.
That's when it gets so over the top, and then even to the point that the guy who just seems to live on the pier, who's sleeping with Magda, also loves Mary and shoots the musician. Oh, we haven't talked about the musicians yet.
Is that 6 people that love her?
Yeah.
Well, the movie opens with Jonathan Richman and his drummer, Richmond's lip sync is pretty bad, which I think is part of the joke. Yeah, it is, because he stops playing the guitar for a minute, but you still hear the guitar.
The song is terrible. The lyrics are terrible. His singing is terrible. It's all got to be intentionally deeply corny.
And you see him and the drummer several times throughout the movie on screen. And at the end, of course, the one guy, Richmond, gets shot and goes over the pier. Interesting way for the movie to end, because you have to have one more joke, I guess. So they do have everybody in the movie singing Build Me Up Buttercup. So obviously they plan to do this because so many different people who are only in the movie for one scene. Richard Tyson, the cop, and the other guy, they're part of it, all the jailbirds. The people that are found at the rest stop. Apparently that's all crew members playing the homosexuals.
It's another great...
Well, it's so mentioned that people that go to rest stops are all there for that reason, and then they actually go to a rest stop and show people doing it for that reason.
But just the relentless abuse that Ted takes.
That might be Ben Stiller's best moment in the whole film, when the two cops are on him about... Because he doesn't know there was a corpse in the car. He thinks they're talking about the hitchhiker.
It's illegal to pick up hitchhikers. Mm-hmm.
I do it all the time. I don't know, 20 times in my life. But they're suggesting that he's killed somebody 20 times in his life.
It's great writing.
And then Tyson bashes his face. And the way he falls also, so he's got to sell that his face is being bashed onto the desk. But then after that, it almost seems like that was an accident. I don't think it was, like the gurney was. But then Stiller falls off the chair. Oh.
What does he say? What's the matter with you? That was in the trailer. I'm pretty sure I saw that over and over in the trailer.
But one guy's not in the movie very much, even though he's a big part of the plot. He's a big reason why Pat Healy ever goes to Miami, because Jeffrey Tambor is the one that finds Mary. Because, of course, she changed her name. He apparently was in the movie a lot more, and they had to cut him out. So he's only in 2 scenes, reading lines at one point with Pat. Oh, man, I really should be better to that girl. But they're both just reading a script that Healy wrote. But when we first meet Tambor as well. So a pretty big name who's in this movie, but doesn't have that much screen time. But he would have if they didn't cut him out so much.
Also big name, not much screen time, Sarah Silverman.
Yeah.
Very early role for her.
Wasn't really a big name at that point.
No, she absolutely wasn't.
Stand-up comedy. She'd been acting a little, I guess, yeah. Richard Jenkins also plays the therapist early on.
Yes, another great gag.
But not a well-known person really then, I wouldn't say. I don't know if he's that well-known now.
Truly, this is an example of a screenplay where they must have made 100 joke passes that they just kept looking at every single scene and saying, how can we make this funnier? This is exposition. This is important to the plot. This is an emotional beat. How can we inject humor into it? And they are so creative. The shrink sneaking in at the tail end of the session, finishing off a
Ted is that boring. But Harlan Williams, of course, is that hitchhiker with the 7-minute abs idea. Apparently he wouldn't read what they wrote for him, which fits with Bill Murray in their previous movie in Kingpin, because Bill Murray is known to improvise whenever he wants to. And they were fine with that because he made it better anyway. I'm not so sure it was quite the same with Harlan Williams because he wasn't Bill Murray, but he's pretty funny in his one scene.
They considered casting Bill Murray in the Pat part. He was too old and nobody would buy it.
Interesting because he's got a similar type of role in the same year, and Matt Dillon's in this too, Wild Things.
Oh, yeah.
Matt Dillon the same year did another movie where he plays something he really hadn't played before, a complete sleazy scumbag. That movie is one of the great twist movies of all time, and it's something pretty sexy too. But Dillon's in that with Kevin Bacon, Denise Richards, Nev Campbell, and so on, Bill Murray. So Ben Stiller, we've only ever covered him once before that I can see. It's the Royal Tenenbaums. That was many years ago. Although Chris and I have covered him a couple times because he was in Happy Gilmore in a small role. And he's the bad guy. He's pretty funny, actually, in Dodgeball. So they're on Scoring at the Movies, my sports movie podcast. And it does say online this is his favorite role of his own, even though I didn't personally like him that much in it. I think his best role, if not the best then, but certainly one of, is Tropic Thunder. A movie with so many funny people, and he might be the funniest one.
And he directed it.
That's right. And he co-wrote it. And I think he produced it. But when you're in a movie like that with all those funny people, including Jack Black, Downey, and so on, and you've got some of the best moments, including the I'm a rooster illusion, or coming out of that, the sun burns his eyes. That was probably his best role, certainly one of. And this one, I just don't fully get it.
I disagree with you about him and There's Something About Mary. I 100% agree with you about Tropic Thunder. I also think he's one of those actors that secretly has a great gift for drama because we've seen him in some Noah Baumbach films.
Permanent Midnight as well.
Yeah, there you go.
Movie.
He really has so much pathos and believability as a dramatic actor. But I think the best thing he does is making TV shows because he is the brain behind, well, not the brain, he didn't come up with the idea for Severance, but Severance is his show, one of my favorite shows on TV right now, and he also made the incredible Escape at Dannemora. It's a mini-series. If you haven't seen it yet, oh my god, you are missing out. It's such an outstanding limited series. So I wonder if he's just now hitting his stride with the thing he's actually best at.
Arguably a legend, the things he's accomplished and some of the hits he's been in. He's been some giant, especially comedy hits, because Meet the Parents, you mentioned already, was also huge, maybe even bigger than this was. Cameron Diaz, we covered her in Being John Malkovich, as we said, Shrek and Vanilla Sky, and then Chris and I covered her in Any Given Sunday, which was the year after this. That was on Scoring at the Movies. Matt Dillon, we talked about To Die For a few years ago. He's in that. Lee Evans was in The Fifth Element the year before this, but mostly did comedies. Chris Elliott, who was Woogie in this. We should have realized what's really going on, but we never hear that he's Dom Wogachowski, whatever his name is. I don't know why Ted didn't realize this when you hear about Woogie all the time from Mary. But breaking out in hives, he says, oh, it's hot down here in Florida. Okay, fine. But he's in Groundhog Day, which we covered, and also has a small role in Kingpin, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. W. Earl Brown, he's in Scream. He's the cameraman. We talked about Being John Malkovich. He's in Vanilla Sky. He's the bartender that won't look at Cruise. But also he's in 3 movies I've covered with Chris on Scoring at the Movies, including The Babe, which we did last year, the Babe Ruth movie. We talked about Lynn Shay already, doing Orange Face in this. I don't think that's really offensive because she's just playing somebody who tans so much that she looks like Donald Trump. And then you mentioned all the other supporting parts like Silverman, Tambor, Jenkins, and Favre. We've talked about the Farrellys plenty. I think their credits. They co-wrote this with Ed Decter and John Strauss, who worked on the Santa Claus sequels, meaning the Tim Allen Santa Claus movies. And the producers, there were 10, including Charles Wessler, who worked on Green Book with Peter Farrelly, and Michael Steinberg, who also directs now. The movie's 185-1. We did see it on Disney+. Cinematographer Mark Irwin. So this is the guy that worked with Cronenberg back in the day, including The Dead Zone and The Fly. And also we did Youngblood, which Chris and I covered just recently on Scoring at the Movies. But he's often worked with the Farrellys ever since. So he's one of those guys that has all these dark dramas to his name with Cronenberg and then these silly comedies. The editor, Christopher Greenberry, cut American Beauty the next year after this, which won or was nominated for an Oscar, I think at least nominated. And he also cut the Farrellys' big 3. So, I mean, the other 2 Farrelly movies, Dumb and Dumber and Kingpin. And then Jonathan Richman, who is the guy on screen all the time, has the composer credit. He wasn't really a composer usually, he was a songwriter, which of course he's doing in this, he's singing songs. So it's a comedy, there are different standards for that, but what'd you think of the look? We know the cutting is actually quite good despite the length of the film and the music.
It's your pretty standard comedy, cinematography, get the gag on film. The editing, I think it's pretty perfect. Great timing, and there's so many surprise sight gags that rely on the edit being timed perfectly. So considering that is something that's a lot harder to do than most people realize, I think it's excellent.
What happens next? Well, Mary finds someone from the Niners who's single, so she ditches Ted so fast. That or these two get married because Mary realizes Ted would sooner die than ever hurt her again or lie to her again. And the lying was more a matter of not telling her how he actually came to find her in Miami, that it wasn't just there coincidentally when she's there in the same area. He was trying to find her, which is not exactly the biggest sin in the world. But he should have been more honest, obviously. If that happened to you, what would you do?
That did happen to me. And I freaked out. I thought he was a stalker.
Oh, okay.
Right before you and I met. Don't you remember?
I forgot about that.
My old boyfriend from high school tracked me down because I was doing comedy at the time. Just randomly showed up at one of my shows and then tipped one of my friends off by basically asking her for advice. And she was like, you need to back off. This
Get away,
crazy.
Woogie.
But I think I overreacted in the end. But I think women have a lot to be afraid of. Yeah. So when somebody does something like that, it actually is really scary. But like everything else in this movie, it's a comedy. So you just got to go with it. It's lighthearted.
That's very true. I'm glad you look at it that way. I think a lot of people probably wouldn't, but...
Come on, lighten up. Have some fun. Anybody who sees this movie and seriously gets offended, I guess you could get grossed out by the vulgarity. I guess you could get offended by some of the subject matter that they are pretty gutsy about conquering. And maybe there's something I'm missing, and I never want to be insensitive about people whose feelings are hurt about one thing or another. I would have to work hard to be offended by
those people
movie.
Can make their own movie if that's such a problem for them, too. They can always do that.
Listen, there's movies that offend me. I don't want to sit here and pretend that there's no such thing as an offensive movie. I was pretty offended by Green Book, a movie that we covered. If you want to hear how that movie got under my skin, you can listen to our podcast about that, because I had no good feelings about forgiving all of the missteps that were made in that movie.
You said, and I said it too, though, that movie wins us over.
I think it's a very well-made film that's incredibly entertaining and easy to watch. Every time I think about it, for more than a second, I find it troubling the way that it glosses over some pretty bad stuff.
Well, generally one of the worst things Viggo's ever done, even though he got nominated for an Oscar for it.
That's also some strange casting.
All right, then, last thoughts on There's Something About Mary, our second movie in Crazy Stupid Love Month.
I really didn't expect to enjoy this one so much 25 years later, but damn, it's still really funny.
We laughed hard, we laughed long. The movie could stand to be more compact, I still stand by that. And it loses so much when Dylan's pushed aside in the second half. I wish I could root for Ben Stiller more than I do. And also Cameron Diaz. I just don't think that she's quite the dream woman this movie puts. If it was Elizabeth Banks, I'd be in.
You have some high standards.
It's not just looks. I don't know. Cameron Diaz is one of those people that I don't dislike her. She also gave up acting a long time ago. I think she might be coming back to it now, but she stopped acting in 2014.
2014. Annie was her last film.
And I think it's because she got married to some famous singer, right?
The guy from Good Charlotte.
And she had okay, there you go. And she had enough money as it was from all the things she'd done, especially the Shrek films. I never heard why she actually left the business, but she's had a hell of a career, and maybe she'll get back into it now. I think she's about my age. She's not old or anything. Okay, then. That's it for There's Something About Mary. I covered The Way We Were on this channel last Friday. If you haven't already, check out that episode, especially if you're itching to hear at least one of us talk about Barbra Streisand, because we never had before. That's on YouTube and in the usual places you look for podcasts. Everything we've reviewed in 2023 is on YouTube. In fact, go to @HYESEllis and subscribe so you won't miss any of the bonus content we've been putting up before that video transitions to the podcast in full. In 7 days, Bev and I will be yapping about Dangerous Liaisons, as I recall. Not funny. We'll finally see Michelle Pfeiffer again. We've only covered 2 of her movies ever, and she wasn't even close to the lead in either of them. Hairspray's one. The other one, I forgot about this, she's also in Mother.
Oh, right, of course.
I was ready to say next week, we've only done 1 Michelle Pfeiffer movie. No, she's in 2 at least that we've covered. I guess it's only the 2 so far, until next week. And of course, John Malkovich and the fantastic Glenn Close, Uma Thurman, Keanu. It's quite a cast. So the coming attractions trivia for Dangerous Liaisons. We find out during my favorite episode of Friends, when they play a trivia game for the apartment, that Rachel claims her favorite movie is Dangerous Liaisons. Joey correctly answers that her actual favorite movie is... what? If you're a fan of Friends, you probably know this immediately.
So for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Dangerous Liaisons. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen. If you've already followed us as Top 100 Project, nothing will change, including access to our archives of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm @BevEllisEllis and Ryan is @MovieFiend51. Or you can reach us by email, haveyouverinpodcast@gmail.com. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
The record didn't work.
Liar.
We'll just start over again.
Yeah, I can.
I'm fucking with you, Bev. I didn't swear the whole movie. I forgot they say fuck many times because she says to Ted, I'm fucking with you, Ted. You're supposed to believe that I meant that.
Oh, thank God I didn't. You would not enjoy the rest of the evening if I did. And cut.